Picking a flagship phone is often a choice between a handful of established brands. Similarly, looking at budget devices can boil down to getting the best price for a chosen minimum spec. So what about the middle of the pack? You want a smartphone that's going to last a couple of years, but you don't want to break the bank. You want to save money, but also make the most of what you do spend. There's a huge array of devices to choose from that sit around the £200 to £300 price bracket. Some may seem under or overpriced, especially if they've been on the market for a while already. Others have heavily advertised features that you might not need. So what about the X screen? Priced at £220, it would seem to be on the lower edge of the middle tier of phones, although it's advertised as having some premium features. So let's take a closer look. The X screen is a mix and match of middle-of-the-road hardware. A few compromises appear to have been made to hit a lower price point, although there's nothing here that shouts underpowered. The main screen is probably the one thing to stick out as a bit odd. For a phone that by its very name wants you to pay attention to the screen, the choice of a 720p panel is an odd one. It's a relatively minor gripe though, as there's nothing wrong with a 720 panel. This resolution is very common, and at 5 inches it's well sized. A proper full HD panel would have been nicer, and would have suited the phone's moniker though. Clearly this is a cost saving measure, as the higher resolution panel would add a fair bit of change to the final price. I think this phone could have justified that though. The processor is a bog standard Snapdragon 412, that's a 1.2 GHz quad core. This chip is used in dozens of phones and is the understated workhorse of many well-performing modern devices. Couple that with 2 gigs of RAM and Android 6, and the X screen ticks off a few more standard boxes. Connectivity-wise, all of the usual suspects are considered, with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 4.1 and GPS. There's also high-speed 4G Lte support and NFC for quick sharing, and Android Pay if that is supported by your bank and card provider. LG clearly want the X range to look like premium level phones. The price tag of course belies that, and when you get the X screen in your hand, you realise that looking premium is pretty much all it manages. It's a bit like an oil painting. Stand away from the phone and sure, it looks like something that should command a much higher price. Chamfered edge, glossy glass black, silver trim, all very stylish. On closer inspection though, and it becomes more obvious that this is a phone skirting closer to the lower tier of current design. Chamfered edges are in fact two tapered plastic blocks between a silvery plastic trim that look nowhere near as good as the curved edge glass I first thought the phone had when I opened the box. Also, unlike the premium coated glass of say an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy, the LG X screen's glossy plastic back is a dirt and scratch magnet. The camera bumps out of the back panel slightly, so the lens cap could get easily scratched, and finally, the overall lack of weight, which is normally a good thing, kinda make the X screen feel like a toy rather than a £200 plus piece of consumer electronics. Perhaps I'm being a little bit harsh on the X screen. It's a functional design, and for the most part, it doesn't actually look bad. However, when you try to emulate something of higher quality, you better do a good job. Android 6 is installed on the X screen, although it is an LG skin called LG UX. Out of the 16GB base storage, you'll find about 10 available for your own use, which is pretty standard. The pre-installed extras are few, however unlike the budget K4 that we reviewed recently, these additional programs are marked as system apps, so you can't uninstall them. A couple of those include Evernote, LG's Quick Memo Plus, and the LG Smart World app, which lets you install themes and fonts and extras to customize the phone. Android purists won't like it, but LG's new UX removes the app drawer, similar to what you see on the LG G5. There's no longer a button on the home screen to list all of your apps. Instead, every installed app has a shortcut, very similar to how iOS works. Shortcuts can of course be grouped into folders. I don't mind this approach, and I can see the benefit. Novice users aren't left confused between the distinction of a shortcut and an installed app. Unfortunately for the home screen obsessed who like to keep their interface clean, there will always be one extra folder sat around with things in it that you don't want to see. Another gripe is that one of Marshmallow's best features hasn't been included. I'm talking here about the ability to merge an SD card with the phone's storage, allowing for true memory expansion. The software on the X screen I've used only sees the memory card as external storage for media. Now, this doesn't make the X screen any different to other similar Android phones out there, but it does feel like LG missed a trick, especially when Android 6 is now going to be the norm on many of its competitors. Overall though, I'm impressed with the LG UX design. The flat iconography feels modern, and core apps such as Dialer, Contacts and Messaging have all been skinned efficiently and consistently. It'll depend on your tastes, but I actually think they look a lot friendlier than stock Android's utilitarian approach. There's also a decent amount of customization options available in the settings. There's fonts, font sizes, personalised ringtones, and the LG Smart World app that I mentioned previously lets you download new launcher themes, high-resolution images. It's something that the novice Android user who picks up a stock Android phone might struggle to get to grips with, whereas here on the LG UX, they have something which is easier to get a handle on and is given to them right out of the box, so it's quite nice to see. On to the second screen. Now, some might call this a gimmick, but after a short time with the phone, I can see the benefits of this little addition. First seen on the limited release V10 last year, the second screen is an always-on display that sits in the top right corner above the main screen. By default, it displays a short personalised signature or message. This shows even when the main screen is off. You can also get notification details that are usually reserved for the notification shade of the main screen. This second screen uses AMOLED tech, so only draws the power when pixels are not black. Seeing as it's a tiny black and white display, only showing small amounts of text, the overall power draw on the phone is negligible, so it's not going to be draining your battery having that on all the time. The display doesn't end there though, you can customise it further. Aside from this signature message and the odd notification, you can have the second screen show plenty of other details, including quick tools like a Wi-Fi toggle or a flashlight toggle, recently used apps, permanent app shortcuts for things you want to get to regularly, a basic music player with play, pause, skip track, quick contacts that you want to call or message regularly, even event notifications from your calendar. So it's quite a useful little tool to have. When active, you swipe across the second display to switch between any of the active modules that you have set up to use, and when the main screen is locked, only basic information is shown the same way that normal notifications work on the main screen, so sensitive info isn't present. I think it's a really well implemented hardware feature, and once it's set up, it becomes second nature to look to the corner for notifications or access one of those regular apps. For instance, a flashlight app or a Wi-Fi toggle app like I mentioned earlier is something I might not want to have on my home screen, but I also do want to have quick access to it because it's used relatively regularly. This is where the second screen becomes a kind of utility belt. No matter what else I'm doing on the phone, I can swipe away at the second screen and get to it quickly without interrupting my main app. For instance, if I'm live streaming something on Kodi, full screen on the phone, but I need to turn on the torch or switch Bluetooth on and off, I don't have to close that app or pull down the notification shade and interrupt what I'm doing. I can just use the second screen. It's neat. There's a good quality 13 megapixel camera on the back of the X screen and an impressive 8 megapixel one to the front. LG could have skimped on those at this price, and 8 on the back and a 5 on the front wouldn't have been considered bad. Of course, it's not all about the megapixel rating. How the images get processed is much more important. The X screen does a fairly good job for the most part. Unlike the high-end camera app found on the flagship G series like the G5, you won't find many options in the app. There's no manual adjustment for white balance or ISO. There's no other preset modes other than the standard automatic shot. So this does mean you're kind of at the mercy of having good conditions. Low light can cause a noticeable drop in quality, that's expected really. So your best images will probably come outdoors in the sun or indoors under bright lights. Overall though, it's a respectable showing from the camera, and one of those things at this price you couldn't really expect much more from these cameras. Overall, the X screen is a bit of a mixed bag. There's some great ideas and specifications here mashed up with an unfortunate flimsy design. I want to love the X screen for the clean interface, the second screen, and having a decent camera at this low price. However, I also want to wear gloves so I don't feel its cheap construction. I want to shout at the designers and shove one of the new Moto G4s in their faces and show them how good a new low to mid-range phone can look and feel. I started this review by saying how picking a mid-range phone can be hard. There are compromises to be made in price, performance, design, feature set, everything really. It's a struggle to see where the value of any phone lies in this range when there's so much choice and so much differentiation. Personally though, I think the X screen is worth its £220 price tag. If you like the LG brand, you want to try something a little different with that second screen, and you're not too fussed about having a pure Android experience, then yeah, give it a whirl. The LG UX is simple to get to grips with, and overall this is a well-rounded specification. The phone is more than capable, and it won't disappoint the casual user who has a bit of interest in new tech. However, if you prefer a truly basic, no-frills Android phone, and want something that looks and feels great on a low budget, perhaps take those pennies elsewhere.